Hello and welcome to the latest Manchester's Red podcast. I'm your host today, Sean McCormick, editor of the Manchester Evening News Sports Desk, and joining me is Manchester United reporter Steven Railston. Before we get going in the podcast, we'll have a look at a shout out to our sponsor, Sadie, which is a brand owned by NordVPN. That is a new eSIM service app that you can use abroad if you're in desperate need of internet connection. You can download Sadie in your app store and use code Manchester at checkout to get exclusive 15% off your first purchase. For more information, please go to our description box. Now, we're recording on Thursday afternoon, and we kind of kicked off today with the really tragic news that Liverpool forward Diogo Jota tragically passed away in the early hours of this morning. He was involved in a car accident with his brother. And Liverpool have confirmed that he's sadly passed away. Obviously, the football world's in mourning, and our thoughts here at the Manchester Evening News are with Diogo's family, friends, and everyone connected to Liverpool Football Club. Obviously, Stephen, before we get going into what the latest goings on in Manchester United, just a quick word on sort of the sad news this morning.
It's just so hard to get your head around it, really, isn't it? Waking up and seeing that news. I think we all kind of hoped it wasn't true, seeing those local reports come out of Spain, but they were verified pretty quickly, unfortunately, on Thursday morning. Absolutely tragic. 28 years old, had his whole life ahead of him. A wonderful football player, but above all, reading articles today and seeing the tributes that have poured out, clearly a fantastic person as well. Three young children, only married 2 weeks ago. There's just no words. It's just so tragic. I think we'll just leave it at that, Sean, because it is really, really sad, isn't it?
Yeah, really sad, and I think you can tell by the tributes that are coming out today, not just from Liverpool, but from the Portugal camp and players who played against them in the Premier League. It's just really, really, really sad news. And again, our thoughts are with everyone connected to Diogo Jota and the sort of the pain that they're going through at the moment. Seems a bit sort of
Trivial.
weird, I guess, to talk about what else is going on in the world and what's going on at United, but that's what we need to do here today. So, in terms of the podcast and today, Stephen, André Onana is probably a good place to start. You've written a piece that's going out on Friday morning, talking about his future. It's looking like he's likely to stay at the club. What's your sort of thoughts on the current situation surrounding Onana and the goalkeeping situation at United?
Yeah, so Samuel published a story that Onana remains intent on staying, I think around, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? So I've just kind of got into it a little bit more and kind of analysed his season. It's probably a famous joke on this podcast that we've mentioned it a few times. Reach, who own all the newspapers, so the Manchester Evening News, Liverpool Echo, for example, they asked us to nominate a few players for Player of the Season. I think that was just before Christmas time. And as a desk, we were pushing for Onana to win that for United. I think Diallo was nominated as well, along with someone else. And I'd done a piece kind of advocating for Onana to win the award, and that coincided with his massive slump in form. I think it's easily forgotten that he actually did make a really good start to the season. He looked to have kind of eradicated those mistakes out of his game. And me and Samuel were down at Selhurst Park for the game against Crystal Palace in September when Eric Ten Hag was still in charge, and Onana made that wonderful double save. He won the Premier League Save of the Month award for those stops. I spoke to him after that game, and then he actually betted it in October against Fenerbahce when he made another amazing double save. So at that point, around October, November time, fans were thinking, do you know what, maybe we're starting to see the best of Onana now, and he's really starting to kind of live up to the billing and what people expected of him. But it all started to fall off. The wheels started to fall off in December time, in the winter. It probably started against Arsenal at the Emirates when he had that howler. He obviously conceded from two corners. And then you look ahead, a big mistake against Nottingham Forest, against Victoria Pilsen. And then, of course, the Lyon episode in the first leg across there in France in the Europa League, where he was at fault for both goals. Obviously, one was worse than the other. It's probably a bit harsh to say it's completely at fault for both. But he had a very bad performance, and that was after Nemanja Matic's comments, saying he was statistically one of the worst goalkeepers in United's history. And I mean, you can't really argue with that, can you, if you look at the stats? Unfortunately, Onana is. So I think the fans who were kind of on the fence with Onana and were willing to give him some more time, I think their patience was really tested and broken last season, I think it's fair to say. I think it was probably the straw that broke the camel's back. And ideally, would fans like to see a new goalkeeper come in this summer? I think absolutely. We've discussed this at length on this podcast multiple times. So there are other positions in that team that need to be strengthened first as a priority. So it was probably going to be a case of kicking the can down the road of Onana, giving them another season and looking at a new goalkeeper next summer. And that's what it kind of appears to be the situation in this window. Neom, who were just newly promoted to the Saudi first tier. Do you remember, Sean? I actually interviewed Roy Carroll, the famous the goal who never was. He's actually working for them. I think he told me that a few months ago. I think that's the club he said he was working for. So they were linked with Onana. And they're signing a new goalkeeper, so that one looks to be off the table. And then of course Monaco have been linked, but whether or not they could submit an appropriate financial package for them after signing Paul Pogba, and they just signed Eric Dyer as well today from on a free transfer. So I imagine there's some decent wages going to both of those players. That's doubtful. So yeah, it does look like Onana's going to stay. That'll be mixed. Fans will kind of have their own opinions on that. Like I say, I think the majority would have liked to see a new goalkeeper, but it's probably not going to materialise this summer, and it'll be one for next year.
Just on that, obviously fans will appreciate that United have got a lot of priorities they need to sort of target this summer. Obviously, they've just finished 15th in the Premier League. It's been a disastrous season that they need to improve on quickly, and there are other positions, namely in the forward areas, that probably do take credence this summer. But good goalkeepers are what sort of underpin good teams. And André Onana now for 2 seasons has shown signs of brilliance, but hasn't really done it on a consistent basis. And I think you touched on it in your piece that's going out Friday morning, Stephen, that David De Gea was shown the door for kind of the same reason, but I would argue some of the errors weren't necessarily as high profile as what Onana's have been. And is there a sort of worry, I guess, that if Onana stays, that any mistake is going to be pounced upon? It's sort of like a similar situation to the fact when, obviously, it's different because he's a player and he's a goalkeeper rather than Eric Ten Hag being a manager. But I guess Eric Ten Hag staying beyond last summer, it almost felt like it was a state of execution. And as soon as there was a bad run of form, that was it. Is there a worry that if Onana, makes two couple mistakes in the first couple of months of the season, is there a worry that sort of really damages United's season?
Well, I'd argue that kind of spotlight's already on him, to be honest. I mean, it's probably the most scrutinised goalkeeping role in England, I'd say. United are the most scrutinised club in the country, so that means their number one goalkeeper is going to have to deal with that pressure and that scrutiny. And unfortunately, Onana's not really looked comfortable with that. There's obviously been, as I said, some promising performances, and you could probably predict how next season's going to go already. He will deliver some strong displays, of course he will, because he's not a bad goalkeeper. He is capable of delivering good performances, but he's also capable of delivering some absolute howlers. Erratic's probably I've said that in my piece. Erratic's probably the perfect word to describe him. It's just sometimes you just think it's often at the most unexpected moments as well. The game will be relatively calm. United might look like they're in control, and Onana just make a huge mistake out of nowhere. You think of the great goalkeepers the club has had: Peter Schmeichel, Van der Sar, David De Gea. Onana's not really in that territory, is he? Unfortunately. So he will need to be replaced if United do want to compete for the Premier League title, do want to move into the top six and really launch a challenge in the next few years, which is, of course, is the aim. So yeah, it's been really underwhelming, to be fair. I think we all expected a lot better from him in the last 2 years. And when you talk about David De Gea, there was the errors obviously crept in towards his last 18 months, 2 years at the club, which kind of, I guess, affect how fans remember him because there's some recency bias there. But for a long time, he was the best goalkeeper in the world. He was tremendous at keeping the ball out from the back of the net. And Nana is just nowhere near that level, is he? Unfortunately. He's a good person. He's a good character to speak to. He always comes across very well in the mix zone, and he's often willing to speak as well, which is appreciated. It goes a long way. He's a positive influence at the training ground. When you speak to people who've trained with him, they say a lot of good things about him. But you judged by your performances on the pitch, aren't you? That's what matters at the end of the day.
Just playing devil's advocate, then, say if Onana then stays this season and then has a ridiculously good season and doesn't allow the mistakes that have crept in. I mean, this is a big if because the evidence of the first 2 seasons suggests that this won't happen. But just say that it does. do United then revisit that plan next summer, or do you think it's already a case of they've decided that it's just a sort of 1 year sort of state of execution, and regardless, that is a position they're going to have to look at in
But it's
a
like,
year's time?
what odds would you give on Onana going a season without making a high profile mistake?
Well,
Like,
very high, very
is
high.
it is it is it
It's just,
100 to
I think,
1?
obviously, I guess the risk is with that kind of tactic, Stephen, is that like a lot can change in a year for good or bad. And if United have decided now that he's not good enough, if he then performs all season, is he not good enough again the following summer? Or again, is it futile to sort of wait that long? Because if you've decided now that he's not good enough, then what's the point of waiting another year? I know there's other priorities, but surely, again, the goalkeeper's such an important position. There's a lot of scrutiny on it. You act now rather than waiting in that 1 year's time.
It's just I guess it's just a case of deciding which positions are the priority. And at the moment, a goal scorer, a centre midfielder, a right wing back, obviously number 10. That's been filled with Kuna and Buemo coming in. I'd say those positions are more of a priority because you can just kind of continue with Onana. Yes, he might make 3 or 4 mistakes throughout the season, but he will also save you the occasional point. We've seen that with some amazing saves. So I think it is one that you could kind of kick down the road a bit and address next summer. He was obviously taken out of the team, wasn't he, around the springtime, lost his place against Newcastle. Bayendier came in at St James's Park up there. But Bayendier again, I mean, incredibly unconvincing as a number 2 goalkeeper. Wouldn't be awfully surprised if the club were trying to do something there this summer, because when he stepped in, he's just looked below the level required. So as a goalkeeping unit right now, it's not great at United. Tom Heaton, I think, should have played a bit more actually last season. He's obviously just signed a 1 year extension. He's definitely way more capable than some might think he is, because he's 38, 39 now. But I'd still say Tom Heaton's up for the job as a number 2. So it might be interesting to see if he gets more of a kick next season.
And sort of staying, and we're moving away from the goalkeeper situation, but staying on a sort of position that United would probably ideally like to strengthen, but again, is probably way down the list of priorities. There's a new right wing back, and just looking at a report that emerged overnight was basically that Denzel Dumfries, who has been perennially linked with United for the last 3 transfer windows, particularly on Eric Ten Hag, who was a massive fan of his, has reportedly got a £21.57 million, and that's the current exchange rate to €25 million that I googled earlier. Release clause in his contract that's only valid to the middle of July. That's what Fabrizio Romano's reporting this week. Do United need a new right wing back, and do they go in for Dumfries? Again, it's not a priority position, I would argue, but also when a player of his quality becomes available for that sort of fee, is it a deal that United should be looking at?
Well, say I'd actually argue I think it is. I mean, centre forward, number 10, centre midfield. You could probably go for a list. I'm listing the full team, yeah. Right, wing back would probably be my priorities this summer. So ideally to get someone in, because Diogo Dallo I had a disappointing season. I'd say maybe that's a bit harsh, because he started to improve in the spring. Obviously made an assist at the King Power Stadium. Performed well, looked comfortable against Man City, scored against Sociedad in the Europa League. So he quietly improved around that time of year, but the first half of the season was quite difficult for him. I think as well, it has to be factored in that he was playing at left back a lot of the time. And although Diogo Dallo has been kind of sold as a versatile player, and he can play on that side, he's clearly not as effective at left back than he is at right back. He's clearly more comfortable at right back. And I think he actually admitted that when the players jetted across to India after the postseason. So Maguire, Dallo, and Onana went across there, and I think Dallo was talking about his position, and he said, "I am better at right back." But is he good enough to start every game at right wing back? Does he give you enough going forward? And defensively, I've always probably been a bit of a harsh critic of Dallo. I think he's a very good squad player. He's incredibly consistent. He works hard. He's a model professional. So he ticks all those boxes, and he'll always have a kind of a role in the squad because of that. But is he the player you want, again, if you want to challenge for the Premier League title, if you want to be finishing top 3? He obviously did it a couple of years ago, but especially in the system of right wing back, it's easier for him to play as a traditional right back instead of that role. Dumfries would probably be. I've actually changed my opinion on Dumfries. I mean, you watch a player a few times, you do form an opinion. I like to say a couple of times and play a couple of times until you make your mind up. But Dumfries' performances in the Champions League this season probably changed my opinion on him. He was actually really good, wasn't he, for Inter Milan? He was really impressive. So if he's available for that kind of fee, 25 million, I think that obviously is a good opportunity. And you think a Premier League club might try to take advantage of it. I know Barcelona have been linked as well, but red flags, Dutch player who Ten Hag wanted to sign. We've been here before.
We certainly have, and I guess the sort of internal option that could be used as a solution at wing back this season is Amad Diallo, who obviously played in the role a few times last season. Um, he's known more as an attacking player. Obviously, his numbers last season, his performances last season were excellent. But I guess with Mateus Cunha already through the door and Brian and Mbeumo, high on United's priority list this summer to bring in as a new signing, could Ahmad's future be as a wing back rather than as one of those two sort of attacking midfielders in Ruben Amorim's formation?
Well, I was kind of banging the drum for that when he returned from injury. It was before his ankle injury in February. Yeah, Ahmad had a fantastic season. Him and Bruno Fernandes were the two players to emerge with real credit. It was really, really good to see him finally kind of come into his own and deliver, because there'd been a lot of promise and there'd been a lot of glimmers on the pitch, and there'd been a lot of talk. Could he do it? And he proved it in abundance last year. He was fantastic, and he was really unfortunate to kind of pick up that problem in training, the ankle injury, at a real time when he had momentum. And if he hadn't have picked up that injury, he might have pushed Fernandes for the Player of the Year award. I have a sneaky feeling that would have happened. But in terms of his best position, when you're bringing in potentially another two number 10s, in Cunha and in Mbeumo, you're also going to have Mason Mount. Where does Kobbie Mainoo fit into that? Amram's been playing Mainoo in one of those roles. Where does that leave Ahmad? Because you'd think he is a guaranteed starter. Does that mean he plays at right wing back? It will be really interesting to see where Amram thinks his future kind of lies, and especially in the first few weeks of the season, because it'll give us a clear idea. Because if you play Ahmad at right wing back, are you going to have Patrick Dorgu at left wing back? Is there enough defensive cover there? Is that very attack minded? Do you have the correct midfielder in there to cover the back three? I don't think Ugarte particularly could do that, and it has to all come together. So there's a few questions there. And that's presuming obviously Dorgu will be starting the majority of games at left wing back, because of course he's just signed in January. He was for the majority there, so you'd think that would be the case. See, I don't know. Do you need a more defensive minded right wing back? Ahmad's obviously going to give you a lot more going forward. It could just be decided that selection on who the opponent is. If it's a weaker opponent who United should have kind of penned back, perhaps you could go with Dorgu and Ahmad. If you're playing against a Liverpool or a City who are likely to have more possession, maybe you go for a more defensive option. So that could be Amram's thinking.
Definitely, and I guess if Ahmad is sort of the start and right wing back at the start of the season, then it sort of heightens the need for United to bring in a more defensive minded midfielder to play alongside Bruno Fernandes in the middle. So that's something we can keep an eye on throughout the transfer window. Just on the subject of Eric Ten Hag, there was a story doing the rounds earlier this week. Benny McCarthy, who was obviously part of Ten Hag's staff for a period at United, he was pretty scathing about the decision to get rid of Scott McTominay last summer. Obviously, McTominay has done incredibly well at Napoli. He's won Serie A. He was named the league's MVP. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, and obviously looking at it now, you'd think that was a bad decision. But I guess at the time, there wasn't any of this sort of hyperbole around it at all. It was a decision that it was kind of brushed off as, yes, it's sad, but it's perhaps necessary to get rid of a player of McTominay's ilk for pure profit and what was a decent fee at the time.
Should probably nickname Benny McCarthy Bonkers Benny, because he comes up with so many crazy quotes since leaving the club. I mean, he's manager of the Kenya national team now. I just had to double check that there. But he's clearly not getting enough money, because I mean his quotes are getting produced by gambling companies, aren't they? I think, who are sitting down with him and interviewing him. I'm not complaining, because it's producing some great copy and some great articles for us who are covering the club. I think those quotes were picked up by a few different outlets, actually, which tends to be the case when he speaks, because some of them are a bit left field, and some of them are a bit silly. But I can see where he's coming from with McTominay, especially after the season that he's had. I think supporters have just banged their head against the walls and thought that's bloody typical, watching McTominay last season with Napoli because he was amazing. He was fantastic. I think 13 goals in all competitions. I was in favour of keeping him at the time. I think he should have been kept. I think me and Tyrone, Marshall, were on the same page with that. We made the case on a few podcasts that kind of Ferguson would always have a role in his squad for a player of McTominay, who's come through the academy, has proven himself in the Premier League, and he'd kind of found his feet in a more attacking role where we hadn't seen him. He was fantastic, obviously, in his last season, making those late runs into the box, dare I say, Frank Lampard-esque. But we've seen him again for Napoli. He's become a goal scorer. Conte's got the best out of him. Having said that, although I did think it was the best decision to keep him, it was it 30 million euros, 25 million pounds. At the time, the deal was very good. McTominay wanted a new challenge. It made sense for all parties, and he wouldn't be probably performing the way he is if he'd stayed at United. So it probably was the right decision to let him go, because of the money they've received, because of how it balanced the books, and it unlocked funds to use in the transfer window last year. Because unfortunately, in this world of PSR, it incentivizes sales of academy graduates, which is just, it's absolutely backwards, isn't it? So if that world didn't exist, then maybe McTominay would have been kept and United wouldn't have had to sell. But unfortunately, that's a reality.
And I guess the next point to move that on is if he had stayed at United, he wouldn't necessarily have had the brilliant season that he's had at Napoli. He's went over there and he's become the main man under Antonio Conte. And I know towards the end of his time at United, he was playing in a sort of more of an attacking role. And for Scotland, obviously, he started scoring quite a few goals in a more attacking role. But is it fair to say that if he had stayed at United last summer and then he was playing in a more attacking role, that wouldn't necessarily have got the sort of incredible hype that surrounds him in Naples at United, purely because he's been there for so many years and he played in a sort of more defensive role for a lot of those years. There wouldn't have been the sort of, I guess, the excitement, the hype around McTominay that he's received in Naples that it would have been at United. And I guess I'll ask you the question: would you have been able to thrive in that environment the way he's thrived in Naples?
I don't think he would have been in the team because Amram comes in November from Sporting Lisbon and plays with two number 10s. Is Scott McTominay technical enough? That's a bit of a critical thing to say. He's obviously a wonderful footballer. He's technically fantastic. He's way better than me. He
But
rocks the
I think that
five
probably
sided.
sums up the perception, though, Stephen, doesn't it? Where like in England, there is this perception that he isn't technically good enough to do that role, and that wouldn't have been the acceptance of him becoming that main man. Whereas in Italy, he's went over there with a clean slate and has proven he can be the man. He wouldn't necessarily have had that time with United.
But I think there's actually some truth in it. To be fair, I really like McTominay. Like I say, I think he would have been the best case scenario to keep him. But is he technical enough to play in one of those roles in our room system? I don't think so. Especially when you look at the targets who they're looking at this summer. Compare McTominay to Mbuemo and Kuna. Very, very different profiles. He's that kind of classic throwback midfielder, isn't he? Making runs into the box, scoring late goals. You think of Frank Lampard, obviously made that example. And he's very good at that. He's kind of come into his own in his late 20s and developed that and added that kind of goal scoring. Ten Hag always used to say he had a smell for it. He said, Scotty's got a smell for it. I can never do Ten Hag's accent, the Dutch. It's quite a hard one to do. I think Samuel can do a better one than me, so I'm not going to try. But yeah, I get what you say. I mean, when a player's across in England for a long time, and especially at a club at United, they build a certain reputation and they're perceived in a certain way. And you're right, when you go to a new country, it is a clean slate. But I think it was the right move for all parties, and he has benefited from that clean slate. But also, I don't think he would have got into Amram's team in one of those roles.
Just to finish off, then, I suppose there'll be no talk of McTominay if United start the season with Mateus Cunha and Brian Mbuemo in those two attacking midfield roles. The excitement will be very high. Obviously, two players who scored a lot of goals last season. I guess just to round off for the week, where do we stand on the current transfer situation? Because obviously, me and you that spoke on this podcast on Tuesday. We spoke about the fact that they want Mbuemo. We spoke about the fact that they want to sell the likes of Marcus Rashford and Anthony and Jadon Sancho and Alejandro Garnacho. Has there been any sort of progress whatsoever since then? And what can United fans sort of expect moving into pre-season starting next week?
I mean, after having two bids submitted for Mbeumo, they've obviously both been knocked back. I think it's imperative to get that third bid correct, because if you have a third bid knocked back, you probably start to think about moving away from the negotiation table. Um, they're obviously the closest in an opinion about valuation than they ever have been, because talks have been going on for over 3 weeks now. Um, so they're clearly quite close to an agreement, and now it just the kind of final push needs to be made. Again, compromise is always the key word in negotiations, isn't it? Someone or both kind of parties have to make a little bit of compromise to reach that agreement. I think fans are starting to get slightly concerned, but I guess it's just a case of waiting and kind of being patient. Um, I don't know what time a transfer officially becomes a transfer saga. Is it a month? Because if this has been going on for a month, we can officially call it a transfer saga. Um, but yeah, obviously they need to get that third bid right, and there's no point of kind of rushing in with that third bid and it being rejected. So I think the third bid has the potential maybe to be the final bid, because if then that gets rejected, I think they'd have to maybe think about walking away. In terms of sales, just a case of again waiting and seeing. Those players we discussed the other day, Rashford, Garnacho, Sancho, and Anthony are kind of expected to report to pre-season as usual, as they would, because they're paid their wages by United on Monday morning at Carrington. I'm recording this on a Thursday. I think it's going out on a Friday morning, isn't it? So, and bear in mind, everything I've just said could look very daft by Friday morning by the time this goes out. But it's not like the situation with Mason Greenwood last summer, when they had to arrange that sale as fast as possible. They obviously would like to make sales as fast as possible this summer to get funds for Amram, but that was a different situation. It was a bit more sensitive, and the optics of him going into the training ground on the first day wouldn't have been good. But those four players, for all they've obviously had their differences with management and kind of Eric Ten Hag or Ruben Amram, they obviously will be reporting for pre-season at Carrington on Monday. So all quiet on the Western Front as things stand, but I imagine things will burst into life soon.
But you can keep up to date with all of that on the Manchester Evening News website. Just follow our United pages, and we'll be bringing you all of that as we get it. We'll be back next week with another episode of Manchester is Red. Thanks for joining us as always. I've been Sean McCormick. He's been Steven Railston. And we'll see you next time.